Hi, friends, and here we are again. I'm doing my best with what strength I have to persist in this. This is number 85 in the Raise and the Initiation webinar commentary. It's all part of part 2. What we've been looking at here is this outpouring of the spiritual force, and this is leading to the physical reappearance of the Christ, and it's doing it in certain ways. 3 activities. The outpouring of the spiritual force will be a result of the teaching that we as, hopefully trained disciples, at least that, and initiates can give out, pointing to the surety of Christ's coming. And then the use of the great invocation, as it operates on 3 different levels: mental, emotional, and physical. So we have to point these things out with the offering of the great invocation. And we reach that point here now. Well, let's see if I can get this correct. Let's see. Yeah. Right. Okay. No. There we go. And he goes on to talk about what the Christ will reveal. When he reappears physically, he will reveal the purpose which the masters know and serve. So he's elaborating on this idea of purpose. And let's see if I can get this straight here. Okay. Home and collapse the ribbon. Okay. What this divine purpose may be, as much of it as, let's say, humanity can absorb, because, after all, even the masters themselves do not know the complete purpose of Sanat Kumara, just as they don't know his full name. So it will be a question of how much of the divine purpose is assimilable by humanity. What this divine purpose may be, the Christ himself will reveal upon his arrival. Of course, he's here, but this arrival is what we call, his reappearance. The focal point of his activity will be dependent on the medium used by him to implement that purpose. This is the physical focal point, and let's call it the material focal point, which is probably, we're talking here about the location in a certain country, a certain city. I've already spoken to the idea of New York and Geneva as centers of the United Nations, each having a strong second ray in different ways. So the focal point of his activity will be dependent upon the medium used by him to employ that purpose. Now, I suppose by medium we can mean the Maya Virupa, but we can also mean an outer physical organization, such as the United Nations. Wouldn't it be interesting if the founding of the United Nations were all part of the preparation in the long term for the reappearance of the Christ, known only to him and to the senior members of the hierarchy? Will it be the Chohans, I suppose? Because you can be a member of the hierarchy, be a master, and still not precisely a senior member. Should politics be the medium through which he can best serve, he'll have to, judge of this according to the condition of humanity. It's an ever fluid situation. Then he will determine the locality, that then will determine the locality of the focal point. Should it be religious organizations of the world? It may prove to be elsewhere. If the field of economics or the social sciences, notice how he's taken the first, second, and third ray, then still another locality may prove appropriate. First three rays are the likely ones, as they include the others. The determining factor in all cases, and that which will indicate to him the appropriate place for this focal point, will be the number and ability and status of the disciples found active in the chosen field. More I may not suggest. Well, what will it be? Of course, he is a great second-ray soul and second-ray monad. You know, one could think it might be the religious field, but then again, it appears that there is no accurate predicting of the nature of this focal point. The work done by initiates and disciples will determine a great deal, and there's no way that any of us can escape the responsibility laid upon us. Now, this is the third point which we are talking about here in terms of the outpouring of the Christ spiritual force, leading to the awakening of the Christ consciousness. The third point, leading to his physical reappearance among men, human beings. The demand or prayer or outgoing desire of the masses for the appearance of a liberator and for the establishing of right human relations, plus the work of all the spiritually minded people in all the nations. Well, DK said humanity will recognize that it cannot alone and unaided solve its very pressing problems. Well, we're not there yet, but the problems, the political problems, the economic problems, the religious problems, the environmental problems, technology, which is in some ways out of control, entering areas of experimentation that were attempted in Atlantis unlawfully, and aiding the weapons industry, divisive idealism, constant conflict. Those cover the rays pretty well. That is the condition today. So there will be a demand by humanity realizing, well, this is out of control. And it's always the way of humanity to call upon assistance. Some innate divinity in us knows that such assistance really does exist. The hierarchy says they know what will happen. They're not allowed to say. But somewhere DK said it will be very demanding, and humanity will realize that alone and unaided, it cannot solve its own problems. We seem to be not yet there, but in some ways we're heading for that problem, that realization. All these three factors are today present, but have not yet the needed potency to prove immediately effective. So, you know, so there's the teaching going on, there's the great invocation, there's the demand or prayer of the masses according to mass consciousness. All these factors, three factors, are today present, but have not yet the needed potency, the intensity to prove immediately effective. We're not, close enough to the wall to realize the trouble we're really in a larger sense. Some enlightened souls do realize, and if we could get all those realizations together without the rebuke of the elemental nature which wants what it wants when it wants it, we might approach the whole problem more intelligently. This triple nucleus of determining factors is, however, already firmly established. In this fact is to be found sure ground, not for wild optimism, but for sane optimism. The prayer is going forth, the great invocation is being used, the teaching is going forth, maybe not as widely as it could go forth. Always, there is the ideal, and then there's what we do with it. So, let's see if I have this correct. Yeah, there we go. The teaching, the great invocation, and the demand of humanity. The ground for sane optimism. Always the life of the initiate is one of consecrated kind of sanity, and that's what we hope for. Nothing bizarre about it. It's a sanctified normality, as Master DK has told us. Think of those words. Sanctified normality. So the initiate is not some odd, wild thing. The initiate is much more what the human being can become, and the bizarre trappings of some would-be initiates are false and misleading and sensational and unreal in terms of what is hoped for the world's initiates. It should be pointed out that the principle of conflict is motivated strongly by these same factors. Well, is it the factors here about his physical reappearance, that is the teaching, the great invocation, and what's the last one here? The demand? Is that it? Or are we dealing with the threefold appearance, mental, emotional, and physical? Anyway, in each case we have three factors. The principle of conflict is motivated strongly by these same factors. Well, whenever you try to bring the good, the archetypal good, near to the conditions which are, you're going to have conflict and disruption. It's that way in the individual disciple's life. Everything will rise up against you when you try to apply archetypal goodness in your life. All of the conditioned habits will rise up against you. It'll be a show of plutonic force, and Vulcan will have to be evoked, to bring the will of the soul impressively forward. The overshadowing of all disciples and initiates and consequent stimulation of their natures and their environment must inevitably produce conflict. Okay, well, that's the overshadowing part. That's the part that has to do with the mental overshadowing. The outpouring of that's what he means here. He means the three approaches to the three aspects of man: mind, emotions, and body. The outpouring of the stimulating love of God into the hearts of men must equally and inevitably produce conflict. The line of cleavage between men of goodwill and the unresponsive natures of those uninfluenced by this quality will be made abundantly usefully and constructively clear. And, I would say in global politics, it's happening now. Those who are unresponsive to the higher possibilities and are trapped within the personality perspective, even a rather advanced mental perspective, which is strictly of the personality. And it will be obvious also that when Christ establishes the center or focal point of divine purpose in some definite place on earth, its radiation and implementing potency will also produce the needed conflict which precedes the clarification of the renunciation of obstacles, obstructions. So, come back. So, let's see, where are we here? So conflict, I guess we can put it down this way. Conflict precedes clarification. And sometimes when we are caught in very apparently dire conflicts, we have to realize that they will lead to a clarification. I'm hoping that's the case in the political situation in the world right now, and especially in America, which is one of those places where I think, given the soul ray nature of America and of the planet and of the Christ, a reappearance is possible. So in this third song, I think in the Return of the Christ oratorio, I wrote about the opposition of the forces of darkness to this physical plane reappearance, the onslaught, which can be expected, Every time the Christ takes a step closer, there is a reaction from the elemental nature. And sometimes when you see that reaction, maybe you can infer that the Christ has taken a step closer. But there will come a point in all these three spheres of Christ's proposed activity when conflict will be superseded by harmony. And this we cannot forget as we live through the dire days of conflict when it seems like it will never end. We have to have the wisdom, the realization that conflict must precede harmonization. Harmonization occurs through clarification, and conflict brings on this clarification. This is due to the fact, says the Tibetan, that the energy of harmony through conflict is under the control or influence of the energy of the second ray of love wisdom. Well, there's this definite numerical connection. He tells us, the 1 and the 2 and the 4, the 3 and the 6. He brings attention to those especially. As far as humanity as the sum total is concerned, the conflict of ideas and of emotional desire is today so acute that it will finally exhaust itself. So here's another idea that conflict per se will at length bring on exhaustion. We have seen that, dissonance in groups, dissonance within oneself. It really tires you out until finally it leads to some kind of collapse. So we will have had enough of dissonance, disharmony, friction, conflict. And we'll open ourselves to the waiting harmony which underlies the whole pre-existence of conflict. and men will turn with relief and with the longing to escape from further turmoil towards right human relations. Well, the conflict has not exhausted itself yet, but this is the future. And he says we'll just become tired of the constant chafing, and we will be relieved to turn towards a harmonization with each other. We may even wonder what it was all about as we look back. Why so much conflict? But remember, the consciousness, as prompted by the elemental nature, sees but a partial picture only. And a greater picture of wholeness, as is discussed in the technique of integration for the fourth ray. Move on a pace and see what things look like from the new position once you've moved. So this kind of ideological friction based upon narrow vision, separative vision, will be self-defeating. And we will turn with relief and with a longing to escape from further turmoil towards right human relations, which depend upon, what can I call it, WTH? Will-to-Harmonize. This will constitute the first major human decision leading to the longed-for harmony. Right human relations leads to harmony, and harmony leads to right human relations. The attitude of the masses will be soundly tending towards harmony, owing to the work of the men and women of Goodwill as they implement the streaming forth of the love of God into the hearts of men. And this is akin to the second way in which the Christ is reappearing. That divine love pouring into the mass consciousness, into the human heart, into the astral body. And, it seems far away at the moment, but things can happen rapidly, especially if we're forced at last to face let's say, a common environmental enemy, namely our own stupidity, which has ruined our environment. Of course, some of that has to do with initiation process on the earth. Things are heating up. The base of the spine, I suppose, is heating up. We're taking kind of a fourth subsidiary initiation. Look in a treatise on cosmic fire, page 384, and you'll see some of those initiations lined up. We haven't taken the second cosmic yet, but it's important that we take this fourth or chain initiation. So better times are coming, and Satan, used as a symbol for the elemental nature, the triple elemental nature or quadruple elemental nature, will be bound for a long time, symbolized by the idea of 1,000 years, and an era of harmony will come. Well, there are still battles that lie ahead. Even for a planetary logos, there are battles that lie ahead. So we cannot imagine that all of our problems will be forever solved. There are many challenges, but as it is said, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. So deal with the inharmony you've got in front of you, and that will be sufficient for our present abilities. We have now reached a point where the inevitability of Christ's return is established, at least interiorly, scientifically and under law. I mean, in terms of outer science, maybe not. But according to the law, as occultists understand the law, then yes, established in that way. Let's see if I make this a little smaller so we can see. Yeah. This constitutes a call which he may not deny, and one which he must obey. And I suppose it's in relation to certain aspects of his decision. Obviously, at this point, he's on the path of Earth's service, even though the Ray path is calling to him, and eventually the path to Sirius, where, well, who knows, and that will probably lead to the path of the solar logoi, I suspect. Well, it's, we can speculate upon the destiny of the great masters, but we have enough to handle right here. This fourth ray of harmony through conflict works where the initiatory process is concerned through the heart. The heart is, after all, in a way, counting the fourth chakra. The fourth initiation is ruled by the fourth ray, and it involves particularly the heart center with its 4 chambers. So this fourth ray of harmony through conflict works through the heart, or through what esotericists call the heart center, the focal point through which the energy of love can flow, minimally. And of course it flows through the heart and the head in a still higher way, and through the causal body, and even through what I've begun to think is the 12-fold monad on the second cosmic physical subplane, obviously connected to a degree with the second ray. When the Christ founds his focal point on earth, it will be in the nature of a tiny heart center. And if what the Christ founds is tiny, let's think about what we found. When the Christ founds his focal point on earth, it will be in the nature of a tiny heart center through which the love energy of the hierarchy can persistently flow. You can see it as being a true Mecca. Nothing artificial, nothing just depending upon historical precedent, but something active in terms of the energy released. The harmony which the principle of conflict produces, notice that. It's almost as if you can't have real harmony without the conflict. I'll put it in. As if one cannot have real harmony without the conflict. So the harmony causes an alignment, just the way it does in a choir when a beautiful chord is sounded, something is touched, dissonance, friction out of the way, something higher, the channel is opened for the downflow of harmonizing forces. I think it's a good way to build the Antikarana for some via the principle of harmony. Anyway, the harmony causes an alignment so that the love streaming forth from the heart of God, this is the hierarchy, enters the hearts of men. So, in hierarchy, there may be different points of view, but not disharmony. Hierarchy. Points of view, but not disharmony. And harmony leads to hierarchy. Streaming forth in the love of God enters the hearts of men, so that the hierarchy, which is the heart center, or the place where love prevails upon our planet, is brought into relationship with humanity. And this is what the externalization, let's say, this is what the is all about. Bringing hierarchy into relationship with humanity, bringing the heart center in relation to the throat center, the second ray in relation with the third ray, the egoic lotus in relationship to the personality. All these 2 and 3s together. So that the new group of world servers implementing the love of God and enlightened by the mind of God, it's got a strong Taurus component for the light of God, and the mind, but a strong fourth ray for the love of God, so that the new group of world servers are brought in also into relation with the men and women of Goodwill. They are an intermediary center. Remember the fourfold ajna center, which the new group of world servers are in the constitution of Sanat Kumara. So there's these fours and twos that are lining up here. And as members of the new group, we carry the light, of course, but if we don't implement that light by love, well, the other side has plenty of light. The counterforce has lots of light, but it does not serve, in their case, to reveal love. So, in our case, if we would be members of the new group, love and light must go together, so that the new group of world servers implementing the love of God and enlightened by the mind of God are brought into relation with the men and women of Goodwill in all lands whose task it is to make men's hearts responsive to and receptive to the love of God. Well, we better be bearers of love as well as bearers of light. That's such a definitive statement here, because so often we are referred to as light bearers, light carriers, but we must be love carriers also. But this is another way of saying receptive to the consciousness of the Christ, which is, of course, pure love, as pure as we can experience it. So the new group, better go back here. Here we go. The new group of world servers must carry love as well as light. And let us hope that those of us who aspire truly to be members of this group, because it's not quite the same as being a man or woman of goodwill. I think all of us can look at ourselves and overall in the balance, consider ourselves men and women of goodwill. But really to be a member of the new group of world servers, well, by some definitions, it takes the second degree. And that's something towards which many of us can aspire. But the will of God is coming in after the second degree, and an unusual form of persistence. So at least a man or woman of goodwill, that's where we are, and being realistic, aspiring to be a true member of the new group of world servers, which also contains some high initiates, third and fourth degree, at the very nucleus of that subjective organization. This alignment is now in process of being made, this alignment with hierarchy. It must be brought about automatically when the effectiveness of the principle of conflict is producing liberation. In producing liberation is generally recognized. So, okay, conflict eventually produces liberation, which follows upon clarification. I come to bring not peace but the sword. And that sword is the bringer through conflict eventually of peace, because it is promised, that the binding of the personality, symbolized with the word Satan, which can mean many things, occurs for the symbolic 1,000 years. Thus, the hearts of men, the heart of the planet, that's hierarchy, and the heart of hierarchy, that's the Christ, are in a state of positive contact. Think of that alignment. Use it when you're thinking of how, as a member of the new group of world servers, you relate to your fellow human beings. It's so easy to have the theory, but since the theory is not innate in our behavior, it slips away in the dire moments. So we need to make habitual these alignments, nothing can stop positive contact. When this channel is open and unobstructed, then the Christ will come. That's for humanity, and of course, in the life of every individual, the Christ comes too. And it's one thing to talk about the soul and define it, and it's another thing to feel its positive and radiant energy. Nothing can stop his appearance, and under law, he may not turn his back upon the presented opportunity. Begin to wonder how much of a role the great god Saturn is playing in the demands placed upon the Christ. I mean, these are the truly great gods in which we are simply cells. And they, as great as the members of the hierarchy are, and the Chohans and those of higher degree, let's realize the tremendous number of Mahamanvantaras that separates a god like Saturn or the other planetary logoi from the development even of a high initiate. One day we'll have the idea of the scale of the relative degrees of unfoldment before our eyes and assimilated by our consciousness, and then our habitual over and underestimation will subside. Thus, eventually, the Lord of Love, in response to the invocative cry of humanity, aroused by the principle of conflict. Okay, well, think of the arousal here for humanity. Humanity is thus aroused and engaged and rendered interested. When conflict is at your door, as those who have tried to avoid war have found out, you can't avoid it. You have to choose sides, and you have to engage. Of course, for the fourth ray, both sides must win. Thus is their heart which rests upon the center. It's so great to read, when possible, the integration techniques. I've done my best to give my interpretation, at least of a couple of years ago. But it's so somehow revelatory. Heart which rests upon the center. Upon, not upon. Maybe we'll find it. Okay. So here it is, and you'll see it. The word goes forth from soul to form. Both sides are one. There is no war, no difference, and no isolation. The warring forces seem to war from the point at which you stand. Move on apace. See truly with the opened eye of inner vision. That's the Taurian Shiva eye. And you will find not two but one, not war but peace, not isolation but a heart which rests upon the center. Thus shall the beauty of the Lord shine forth. The hour is now. Kind of wonder who it was, what it was that wrote these old commentaries, because they are so extraordinarily penetrating and precise, and give us the wisdom we need to make the progress we must make. I often am just amused when the libraries of Shambhala have been partially opened to a great scholar like DK, who has conveyed to us what he can. convey, and people say, oh yeah, the Alice Bailey work is now passé. It's like saying that the revelations of Shambhala have been superseded, but that form of misleading, I can only call it dilution of the truth, ends up being pretty empty compared to the real stuff. So, thus eventually the Lord of Love, in response to the invocative cry of humanity, aroused by the principle of conflict, must proceed again to the high place of sacrifice. Is so interesting. Proceed high, walk low. He will appear in that realm as low as he can go, and in doing so he walks high. Must proceed again to the high place of sacrifice and walk openly with men on earth. We can anticipate that we will meet the great Lord. All will be revealed, just as what was revealed, the life of the woman at the well. Was it Samaria? He knew everything. They say of the Christ, he knew what was in man, because Neptune had dissolved the boundaries, and there he could slip within the inner nature of another without resistance, because he had learned the art of identification, thus becoming another and thus knowing. His heart, embodying as it does the love of God, is drawn forth from the heart of the planet, the hierarchy, to the hearts of men, and the path of his return to earth service stands unchallenged and unobstructed. This is the inevitability. No matter how the forces of obstruction fight this inevitability, still caught in their pitiful lower egoism, brothers of unique blindness, exalted in some ways through a high form of selfish light, but they cannot challenge the Christ who conquers through the power of love. Again, under law, a profound optimism is engendered and may be rightly developed. A little while ago, he talked about sane optimism, and now he talks about profound optimism. Well, we students and practitioners of the wisdom, we need optimism. We need something to keep us going. I just know from my own experience the last few days, deadly tired after getting home from the hospital and wondering, could I recover? Feeling things were moving in the right direction, but could I recover? And suddenly I get the idea. I have to do these videos. Suddenly, from the teaching, a great shot, bolt, flow of optimism fills me. My energy increases through the very power of the teaching. So always use the teaching for empowerment when, as DK says, the vibration might be a little lower than it should be. The teaching is waiting to lift us up. And it's just the beginning, just the crumbs off the table of the gods, the ABCs of the profundity of knowledge and wisdom existing in Shambhala, which itself is just the ABCs compared to the solar system and beyond. While it may not be infinite in any particular solar system, it's so profound that it might as well be infinite. in terms of the place where we now stand. The heart center of humanity is created by the sum total of the hearts, symbolically speaking, of those men and women of goodwill in or out of the churches and irrespective of their political concepts. His goodwill is the great uniting factor, and there can be many ideas which are concrete, but sometimes you've seen the apparently strict and demanding type have true goodwill, and the more laissez-faire type have no real goodwill. It's not just a question of being nice, you know. Goodwill is love in action. The heart center of humanity is created by the sum total of the hearts, symbolically speaking, of all those men of goodwill in or out of the churches and irrespective of their political concepts who are serving their fellow men, sponsoring human welfare movements, working on the establishing of right human relations, and consistently offsetting the separativeness of the human mind through the inclusiveness of the divine love nature. Well, you know, mind and heart together, mind and heart, they can be at war because the lower concrete mind is in its own nature discriminative, good, okay, but separative, and it takes a heart, it takes the intuition, it takes inclusiveness, it takes Venus, it takes Jupiter to really put things together. You have, therefore, as a guarantee of the return of Christ into public recognition, every eye shall see him. We don't know if every eye will know who he is, but every eye shall see him. You have, therefore, as a guarantee of the return of Christ into public recognition and implementing of a great alignment. Remember, alignment is both the beginning and the end. So, the Christ, the hierarchy, humanity, and, you know, various intermediary steps, and behind it all, the great Savior, Sanat Kumara, behind it all that, the Solar Logos himself. This alignment, when effectively concluded, will bring about a clear channel or pathway of return or line of light or magnetic power. So this, let's say that this describes the coming beneficent alignment. You know, you have to kind of wonder what our alignment may be. So many problems are caused by lack of sufficient alignment, incorrect alignment. So many people speak of the soul but have no alignment with the soul. Some people find it insuperably difficult and have ahead of them lives of struggle to try to make the bridge, even between the personality ruled by the concrete mind and even the lowest nature of the soul. Nothing's fast here. But things are being speeded up due to the dire necessity under which we labor at this time. Opportunity being so great, and the danger also very great. God helps those who help themselves, okay? And the Savior saves, but something of humanity is demanded, otherwise humanity will never grow. So we can't just rest back and say, the Savior's coming, and if I believe that's enough. Deep down we know it can't be. Okay, so there's going to be a magnetic pathway Between what? The center where the will of God is known. Words easily said. What in the world does it really mean when we hardly know the meaning of will in our lives? This is Shambhala, where the will to good originates. There's also, many types of will. The will to be is a high type. The will to good has in it the first ray, but something of the second. Maybe it combines all the rays somehow, very synthetically. Anyway, the will to good there originates. This will to good is essential love. At this time on our planet, with its second ray soul emerging, the will to good is essential love. What a great thing to think about, a great quote. The good is completeness. The good has Jupiter in it. The good is the archetype. The archetypes begin forming on the second plane. Real archetypes related to purpose. And on this second plane, the second ray prevails. Jupiter's second ray planet in Virgo, the major second ray sign of this time. So the will to good has much of the second ray in it, being, of course, shambolic will, and thus having the first, the combination of the first and second. That's real occultism, what's found on the first and second planes, and obviously they are generically related to the first and second rays. So there's an alignment here between the will of Shambhala, the hierarchy, which is the planetary heart center. And when we've seen those triangles, we've seen that the alignment between hierarchy and Shambhala, well, it's not completed yet. So the masters in hierarchy have plenty to do to make sure that they really know what the will of God is all about. Maybe the Chohans know more, and certainly the three great lords know more, but none of them know it all. And the unknown, unheard, unseen purpose of Sanat Kumara is found within his own counsel. And he keeps that close tiled. The Christ, then, the very heart of love within the hierarchy, the initiates, disciples, and aspirants. Notice they all form part of the New Group of World Servers. If we consider that term very broadly, it has very high initiates and even those who are not of the second degree. The initiates, disciples, and aspirants who form the New Group of World Servers seeking to embody the love and light needed in the world today. The hearts of men of goodwill in all lands who are responsive to love as it can express itself through right human relations. The focal point, and that's coming, of course, we're not there yet. We can go through 5 of these, but we're not there for number 6. The focal point through which the Lord of Love will work on earth, yet to be decided according to the condition and the vehicle or the type of field in which the Christ will appear. The Tibetan has tried to keep us from fixating on the Department of Religion. He says it's one of the great victories of the Black Lodge that anything spiritual has to be religious. We see an awful lot of that in fundamentalism, and other things are considered to be mundane and not truly spiritual. Well, it's a victory for the narrowness of the Black Lodge, especially in these days when the old Piscean thought form is rearing its head for its last hurrah. Shambhala, hierarchy, the Christ, the initiates, disciples, and aspirants, the hearts of the men and women of goodwill, and finally, the Lord, the focal point, unknown yet. Doesn't really help to say we'll be here, we'll be there. Just as the Tibetan says, don't be running around saying, lo here, lo there, here's the Christ, there's the Christ, follow the Christ. let the press reveal the Christ. The Christ is playing a hide and go seek with the press. They've got to find him. Let's be reasonable. The sixfold progression of divine love. We've heard about that. And this is what it is. So here is this sixfold progression of divine love. And it includes Shambhala with its will to good, which is essential love. Let's never forget that we're on a second-rate planet. Well, it's essentially a first-rate planet, but we're not there yet. We're still a non-sacred planet, so the monadic ray of non-sacred planets is occultly ineffective. We have enough with the second ray to bring that second ray in dominance over the third-ray personality, second-ray solar system. We don't know about our cosmic logos, maybe another ray altogether. But it's enough to go as far as the solar logos goes. Second ray personality, second ray soul, maybe a fourth ray monad, but ultimately probably a second ray monad, since the aspectual, or rather attributive, the rays of attribute, when they are a monadic ray, have to evoke a ray of aspect if they're going to ever be released into the three great centers on the logoic plane. So if you will study this sixfold progression of divine love from the highest manifestation of deity, our deity, down to its appearance through the medium of some focal point in our known modern world, it will be apparent to you that a very definite structure of approach has been created. And this would, when we talk to people about this, having a structure, something one can think about, one can visualize, really important. Structure. People need something concrete often to hang on to. And here it is. Shambhala, hierarchy, the Christ, the new group of world servers, the men and women of Goodwill, and finally, whatever that focal point may be. We can speculate, we can prepare wherever we are the best we can without being prejudiced towards what it should be, without asserting any ownership of it. We never know where we're going to be born next, and when the Christ is reappearing, we'll go where we are sent by the soul, and it's all one world, so wherever the Christ deems it appropriate to reappear, then he will. Meanwhile, the work is to be done on a global basis so that humanity is prepared. The teaching must go forward, through the overshadowing of the initiates and disciples. The great invocation must be used, and of course, there has to be that stimulation of the mass consciousness through the spirit of love. A structure of approach has been created, and that a path of return is being constructed, which will bring the long-awaited Christ into our midst. It's such a question of patience and right timing, because if for some reason the timing goes awry, then the whole thing can be mishandled. It won't happen. In terms of the Christ judgment and the judgment of those closest to him. But we impatient human beings, we want salvation now, relief now. I remember when I was in the hospital, 21 days, couldn't speak for 7 of those days, could hardly breathe. I certainly wanted relief now. But all in good time. Nothing can stop or prevent his return today. The evidence of this structure can be seen everywhere. Everywhere. Well, the Tibetan has a great view, has an amazing understanding, broad, confident, earned by his, diligence in the second ray department of hierarchy, largely over centuries. You have to earn your place. Nothing is rewarded without qualification, and qualification is earned. We have to remember that when we seek rapid relief from the inevitable pain in which we are immersed. Well, I can see that it's probably best to begin the next section fresh, not get into it now. So this is please, here we go. This is the end of Raise and Initiation Webinar Commentary number 85. And our day today is the 15th of July, 2017, and beginning of Raise and Initiation Webinar Commentary number 86. I'm not sure what day it'll be on. I've done 2 of these today, pushing it a bit perhaps, but the thought that I could even be doing this at all today was yesterday inconceivable, and only the inspiration of the teaching came to me and lifted me so that energy from somewhere came to do this. The teaching is to be used. It's a great energy source. It improves our life in every way. It has to be taken seriously, not just something to read and theorize about. We have to make our theory reality. Like I've written, Master Moria said, don't try to approach a blast furnace with theory alone, a little bit of theory, unless you really know what you're doing. You're going to get really burned. So theory is the beginning, and we have to theorize it first, but make such an application that it becomes ours, truly, really, inhering, built into us, becomes ours, and no longer merely speculative. It takes time. Time is a great illusion, but it's a rather actual illusion, even if not a real illusion. But is there anything that's not real after all? Well, these are philosophical questions reserved for my forthcoming book, Seeds of the Infinite, if I could ever just get it organized. Grateful am I. Watch out, I'm going to start sounding like Yoda here. Grateful am I to be able to resume this discussing of the great teaching with you, giving you at least my perspective. You'll have your own, But this is a little bit like a class, because that's what a teacher would do, go over these things, give you a perspective, and there would be a back and forth, and we'd discuss it. But, okay, here there's not a back and forth, but later some people might use this to stimulate a back and forth and go ever deeper into an understanding of the indispensable, at least in my thought, the indispensable. Okay, so we'll go on to number 86 when we can, and onward. Have quite a few pages to go, but every one of them is extremely valuable, and you never can tell where you're going to find a hint. Remember, in the mass of material laid down by a master, the modern disciple will find his own hint. Just like I found a hint which works for me and proves to be one of the most substantial hints I've ever found In the definition of harmlessness, it's the life expression of the man who realizes himself to be everywhere. Well, that's enough for me right there. That's so profound, I can barely penetrate it. Right now, I can theorize myself to be everywhere, and the flashes of realization are few and far between. But okay, I've got a hint, and you're going to find your hint or hints, which when deepened will take you ever deeper into an understanding of the teaching. So for now, I'll get this out to Brett, and he'll get it to you, and love and many blessings, and let us proceed. Okay. Bye-bye for now.